On the 5th of January, 1895, the Vienna newspaper Neue Freie Presse sent its special Paris delegate, Theodor Herzl, to cover the humiliating degradation ceremony of Captain Alfred Dreyfus. Dreyfus, like Herzl, came from an assimilated Jewish family who had cut all of his ties with Judaism. Nonetheless, when he was falsely accused of espionage for Germany, the anti-Semites blamed all of the Jews. The cries of the mobs, "Death to the Jews," filled Herzl's heart with despair. The dream of many Jews in Herzl's generation was to become Germans, French, English, etc. As all liberals, they believed that history moved forward toward brotherhood and equality. The idea that the Jews were a people seemed to them outdated. Their cultural contributions were many. Many of them were success stories. Perhaps this explains why their assimilation into European culture caused such a destructive anti-Semitic reaction. Books and newspapers describe the Jews as creatures plotting to take over the world. Herzl became ever more confused during the Dreyfus affair, seeing that the most vicious anti-Semitic libel was taking place of all places in enlightened and democratic France, the birthplace of civil rights. Herzl came to the conclusion that Europe was a dangerous place for the Jews. Herzl wrote a book entitled The Jewish State, a small book that proved a big success. Although the idea wasn't new, and the group entitled Chovavei Zion, or the Lovers of Zion, had already been active for a few years earlier, Herzl's book is what would prove to be the breakthrough for the Zionist movement. The Zionist Congresses brought the Jewish question to the forefront of international politics. From this point on, Theodor Herzl became the hope of many persecuted Jews. Young men and women flocked to the Zionist Congresses that Herzl convened in Basel. There were also critiques of Herzl that came from the leaders of the Hebrew literature Renaissance in Odessa. The philosopher and founder of spiritual Zionism, Amud Ha'esh, disagreed with Herzl that anti-Semitism was the main problem. He thought that assimilation was what threatened to put an end to the Jewish people. Zionism, according to Amud Ha'esh, had to save not the Jews, but Judaism. To accomplish this, he thought that a Hebrew-speaking spiritual center that would stop the process of assimilation had to be established in the land of Israel. Paris, 1896. In the same year that Herzl published The Jewish State and Amud Ha'esh founded his spiritual Zionist newspaper Hashiloach, the citizens of Paris flooded to see a new wonder that had just been invented: cinematography. Among the hundreds of films presented by the Lumiere brothers was a film that described the Jerusalem train station. This was the first movie that was recorded in the Holy Land. Who were the inhabitants of Jerusalem in 1896? According to the census published that year, 45,000 people lived in Jerusalem. Of them, 8,500 were Muslims, a little less than one-fifth of the population. 8,700 were Christians, a little more than one-fifth of the population, and 28,000 Jews, a little more than three-fifths of the population. These Jews were of a special variety. In every generation, their uninterrupted presence was felt next to the Western Wall. They had never heard of Herzl or Achat Ha'am. Their Zionism came from the Bible and the prayer book.
They believed in the prayer book. They believed in what's written, from Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. And they equated Jerusalem with Zion. When they arrived, they didn't come just to be buried on the Mount of Olives, but they came along with 75 other people, children, grandchildren, brother-in-laws, and all of the extended family. They wanted to see Mount Zion in their dreams. This was their reason for being. Zion and Jerusalem was one thing, but to be Jewish meant to be Jewish in the heart and soul, Jewish in Zion.
The Judaism of what's referred to as the Old Settlement had a reputation for being a passive kind of Judaism that came to spend its remaining days in the land of Israel in prayers and in anticipation of the coming of the Messiah. Truthfully, the people who were part of the so-called Old Settlement played an important role in developing the land of Israel in the 19th century. In those days, the Turks controlled Israel. They ruled with an iron fist and didn't allow any political activity. In spite of this, under their nose, important contributions were being made. Starting from 1882, for the first time in history, Jews arrived to Israel whose motivations were not religious, but rather national. This was what's known as the first Aliyah. By the time Herzl entered the picture, the people of the first Aliyah had already established 14 agricultural settlements in the land of Israel. They believed that in this way, they were laying the foundations for the national rebirth.